She just wanted a quiet escape, a break from her messy life back home. But the moment Marissa stepped into that quaint Airbnb in Seville, something felt wrong. The shadows whispered. The floor creaked when no one was there. But nothing could prepare her for the moment she opened the closet and locked eyes with the man who had been living inside. Was he a victim, or the true danger? And why did the last guest vanish without a trace? The sun burned gold over the rooftops of Seville as Marissa pulled her suitcase across the narrow cobbled street. It had taken months of saving, planning, and a messy breakup to get here. She wanted space. She wanted silence. And this little Airbnb in the heart of the historic Santa Cruz neighborhood seemed perfect for that. The photos showed vintage tiles, a sunlit terrace, and a cozy interior filled with Spanish charm. As the host handed her the keys and walked away without even stepping inside, she felt something odd stir in her gut. But she shook it off. It was probably just nerves. She stepped in, dragging her suitcase across the worn terracotta floor. The air smelled like citrus and something faintly musky, like an old, closed-up room. Dust floated through beams of afternoon light. She smiled. This was her restart. Her sanctuary. The apartment was beautiful, old wooden beams above, colorful tiles below, and a small kitchen nestled beneath a staircase. There were 2 bedrooms and one small hallway closet that the host had locked, claiming it was just a storage area. Marissa didn't think much of it at first. The rest of the place was hers to enjoy. She spent her first day unpacking, buying groceries, and sitting out on the terrace with a glass of cheap Spanish wine. As the sun dipped below the skyline, painting the sky with streaks of pink and orange, Marissa finally exhaled. For the first time in months, she felt alone and safe. That night, though, the safety began to feel less certain. Around 2 a.m., a soft creak echoed down the hall. Marissa stirred in bed, half asleep, and blamed it on the old building. But then came another sound, like a foot dragging. She sat up, heart quickening. The apartment was silent again. She told herself she was being dramatic, that old places make noises. Still, she locked her bedroom door, just in case. The next morning, she noticed the coffee mug she'd left on the kitchen counter was now on the table. She could have sworn she hadn't touched it since unpacking. Maybe she had. Maybe not. She brushed it off again and went exploring, losing herself in the city's winding alleys, vibrant markets, and historic cathedrals. By the time she returned that evening, the apartment felt warmer. Lived in. She opened a window to air it out and went about her night. But the feeling that someone, or something, had been inside never fully left. 2 nights later, things grew stranger. Marissa was watching a movie on her laptop when she heard 3 knocks, soft and spaced out, on the bedroom wall behind her. She froze. It was an interior wall. No one should be behind it. She turned off the laptop. Silence. Then, again, 3 soft knocks. Her throat went dry. She tiptoed toward the sound, placing her ear gently to the wall. Nothing. She looked around, half laughing at herself. But when she walked past the locked closet, she noticed something she hadn't before. A thin line of light beneath the door. She dropped to her knees and peered through the tiny gap. The light went out. Swiftly. As if someone had just covered it. Marissa's blood ran cold. She stood there for a long time, too afraid to speak, too shocked to run. Then she grabbed her phone and texted the host. "Is someone else staying here?" she typed. No reply. She stared at the screen for 15 minutes. Nothing. Finally, a message came through. "No. Why?" She hesitated before responding. "I thought I heard something. It's probably nothing." She didn't mention the light. Or the knocks. Or the mug. She needed to be sure before saying anything else. That night, Marissa couldn't sleep. The moment she turned off the lights, the silence of the apartment felt suffocating, like the walls were listening. Her room was dark except for the faint glow from the street lamp outside, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch with the creaks of the wooden beams above. She closed her eyes tight, trying to breathe through her racing thoughts. But again, just past midnight, came the sound. It wasn't loud or violent, but soft, like someone brushing their fingertips across the wall. She held her breath and listened. The noise returned, this time more distinct. It sounded like footsteps. Slow, deliberate, and too light to be anyone walking normally. She sat up in bed, her heart thudding so hard she could hear it in her ears. Marissa grabbed her phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam danced across the room, revealing nothing but still air and quiet. She stood, holding her breath, and tiptoed to the door. Outside in the hallway, it was colder. The air felt different, like it hadn't moved in a while. She passed by the locked closet again and paused. There was no light under the door now, no sound, just silence. But as she turned to go back to her room, she heard a faint rustling from inside the closet. Not the building creaking. Not her imagination. A deliberate movement. She stumbled back a step, her breath caught in her throat. She wanted to run but stayed frozen. Eventually, the noise stopped, and only her shaky breathing remained. She returned to her room and pushed the dresser in front of the door. That's how she slept, if you could call it sleep at all. The following morning, she found 2 of the chairs in the dining room had been moved. Not much, just a few inches, but enough to notice. She hadn't used them yet. She hadn't even sat at that table. A glass that had been inside the kitchen cabinet was now on the counter, clean but damp, like someone had used it during the night and rinsed it. Her stomach turned. She checked the door locks, still locked. Windows, too. No signs of forced entry. And yet, these things were moving. Someone was here. Or had been. Marissa contacted the host again, this time more direct. "Hi. I think someone might be in the apartment. Could you check if anyone else has keys?" The reply came slower than expected. "No one should. Just me. I'll come by this evening." She waited all day. She didn't go out. She didn't dare leave the apartment alone. The thought of returning to find it worse, different, was too much. But evening came and no one showed. No host. No message. Only the growing fear that she wasn't alone. That night, Marissa stayed up. She sat on the bed, her back to the wall, with the lights on, gripping her phone tightly. Around 3 a.m., the hallway light flickered. She hadn't turned it on. It was motion-triggered. Marissa stood up fast, the blood draining from her face. Something had passed by. Someone. She crept to the edge of the bedroom door and slowly pushed it open. The hallway was empty. The motion light blinked and then turned off again, swallowing the corridor in darkness. But just before it did, she saw it, barely. A shadow ducking out of sight. She couldn't be sure. It was fast. But she knew what she saw. She slammed the door and shoved the dresser back into place. The next day, she walked to the local police station. She wasn't sure what to report, but she needed to talk to someone. She explained the noises, the moved objects, and the flickering lights. The officer was polite but dismissive. "Maybe you're just nervous, Senora. It's an old building. Many are haunted with noises." He smiled, but it wasn't comforting. She asked him if anyone had ever filed complaints about that Airbnb before. He shook his head. "Not that I know of. But I can send someone by, if you like." She thanked him and returned to the apartment, still feeling uneasy. That afternoon, she walked through the apartment slowly, room by room, opening every door, every drawer. The place wasn't big. It shouldn't have taken more than 10 minutes. But when she returned to the hallway, she stopped cold. The closet door, the one that had always been locked, was now slightly open. Only an inch, but enough to see the shadow inside. Her legs went weak. She reached for her phone, her fingers trembling. But she didn't call anyone. She didn't scream. She walked forward. Slowly. One step. Then another. She placed her hand on the edge of the closet door and pushed. It opened with a creak, revealing a narrow, dark space filled with musty linens, old boxes, and behind them, movement. A figure shifted just enough for her to see it. A man. Curled up, eyes wide open, staring right at her. He didn't speak. Neither did she. For what felt like an hour, they just looked at each other. He wasn't aggressive. He didn't move forward. He simply sat there, breathing, blinking, as if he had expected this moment for a long time. She slammed the door and ran. Out of the hallway. Out of the apartment. Down the stairs. Onto the street, gasping in the open air. She didn't stop running until she reached a nearby cafe. She sat outside, shaking, staring back at the building through the trees. What was he doing there? How long had he been inside? Was he dangerous? Or was he hiding from something worse? That night, she didn't go back. She booked a cheap hostel across town and tried to sleep, but couldn't. Her mind kept replaying that look in his eyes, not fear, not guilt, but sadness. As if he had a story to tell, but no voice left to speak it. The next morning, Marissa returned to the Airbnb after hours of pacing through the streets of Seville. Her hands were still trembling, but she needed answers. She needed to know if what she saw was real or if her exhausted mind had conjured a face in the shadows. With the morning sun casting bright light through the windows, the place felt less sinister, but only slightly. She crept down the hallway, her steps careful and soft. The closet door was shut now, and the light from inside was gone. Everything looked untouched. Almost too perfect. But the air felt different again. Thicker. Like it was holding its breath. She stood in front of the door, her pulse roaring in her ears, and slowly reached for the knob. It was cold in her hand. She turned it slowly, and this time, it wasn't locked. The door creaked open. Inside, it wasn't a closet at all, not in the way she imagined. There were blankets laid on the floor, an old pillow, a few food wrappers, a plastic bottle of water, and what looked like a notebook tucked behind a dusty box. The air inside smelled stale and metallic. Marissa took a step in. It was barely wide enough for her to stand. The walls were scuffed, the corners filled with lint and cobwebs. Someone had definitely been living here. She reached for the notebook, carefully opening the cover. The first few pages were empty, but then she saw messy writing in both English and Spanish. Words crossed out. Sentences half-written. Phrases like "don't trust the host" and "he watches everything" repeated again and again. There were sketches too. One of the apartment. Another of a man's face. But it wasn't clear who he was. Before she could turn another page, she heard a soft rustle behind her. She froze. A figure moved at the end of the hall. Not fast. Not loud. Just there. A shadow stepping into view. She backed out of the closet slowly, clutching the notebook. And then, from the other end of the hallway, the man from the night before appeared. Not behind the closet. Not crawling from the walls. Just walking calmly from the living room, like he belonged there. Marissa backed against the wall, heart pounding, arms shaking. The man held up his hands slowly, palms out. "Please don't scream," he said in Spanish, then repeated in broken English. "I'm not here to hurt you." His voice was low, hoarse, like he hadn't spoken aloud in days. Marissa didn't move. Her legs were locked in place. The man stepped closer, carefully, like approaching a wounded animal. "My name is Elias," he said. "I've been here for weeks. Maybe months. I don't even know anymore." She stared at him. His clothes were worn. His face was sunken. But his eyes didn't look cruel. They looked tired. "How did you get in?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Elias looked at the floor. "The host used to let me stay. Just for a few days. Said I could sleep in the closet. Said no one would know." Marissa blinked. "Why?" Elias hesitated. "Because I knew too much." Her skin went cold. Too much about what? He looked up at her, his jaw trembling. "About the others. The ones who stayed here before. The ones who didn't leave." Silence fell between them like a weight. Marissa clutched the notebook tighter. "What are you talking about?" He stepped forward again, slower this time. "I stayed here once. A long time ago. Back when the host was always around. I thought it was just a cheap place to stay. But strange things started happening. I saw people come in and never leave. I saw things hidden in the walls. I found keys that didn't belong to anyone. One day, I tried to leave, and he told me I couldn't. Said if I told anyone, I'd disappear like the rest. So I hid. And I stayed. He stopped coming. But I didn't dare leave." Marissa felt dizzy. "Why haven't you gone to the police?" Elias laughed bitterly. "They think I'm crazy. I've tried. I've gone to the station. They smile. They pat my shoulder. And then I come back here, and nothing changes. One time, I left the notebook outside the station. The next day, it was back here. Inside. On the floor. He pointed to the spot by the closet. He sees everything. Marissa stepped back. Are you saying the host is still watching? Elias nodded slowly. I think he never stopped. Marissa looked at the walls, at the tiny gaps in the wood, at the light fixtures. Were there cameras? Hidden holes? Elias spoke again. You're not safe. You shouldn't stay here. He chooses who leaves. The fear in her chest turned to nausea. She didn't know whether to believe him. She didn't know what was real. But deep down, something inside her said he wasn't lying. There were too many things that didn't make sense. Too many details that felt deliberately hidden. She backed toward the front door. I need to go, she said. Elias didn't stop her. I won't hurt you, he said again. But if you stay, you'll see what I mean. You'll understand. Marissa didn't reply. She stepped out into the street, the door swinging shut behind her. She stood under the bright sun, the sounds of the city all around her, and felt like the world had split in two, one where this was all in her head, and one where every nightmare was real. Marissa didn't sleep the night after her encounter with Elias. She laid awake in the hostel bed, eyes wide open, thinking about every word he said. She replayed his voice in her head, the way he looked at her, tired but sincere. If he was lying, he was good at it. Too good. And if he was telling the truth, then she had stepped into something much deeper and darker than a creepy Airbnb experience. By morning, she knew she couldn't leave it alone. She needed answers. She needed to know who Elias was, and what had really happened in that apartment before she arrived. She started searching online, looking up the Airbnb listing again. This time, instead of just reading the host's bio or the glowing reviews on the main page, she dug deeper. She found older versions of the listing cached online, ones that had been changed or hidden. Different names had been attached to the listing over the last few years. Same pictures. Same address. But at least 3 different hosts. And the reviews weren't always glowing. A few from years ago stood out, comments that mentioned strange noises, things going missing, uncomfortable energy, even a couple guests cutting their trips short without explanation. Marissa followed one review to the user's profile. It had been deactivated. Another reviewer had left only one review ever on this property, and their account was still active. She sent them a message. It was a long shot, but she was desperate. Hi, I'm staying at the same place you reviewed in Seville a year ago. You mentioned weird noises. I've experienced something similar and found someone living inside. If you know anything or remember anything, please message me back. I don't feel safe. She hit send and tried to breathe. A few minutes later, she got a reply. I know exactly what you're talking about. I didn't say everything in my review. I left early. I felt like I was being watched the whole time. One night, I found scratches on the inside of my closet door. Like someone had been trying to get out. I told Airbnb and they took down my comment. Be careful. Marissa stared at the message for a long time. Her hands started to shake again. This wasn't just her imagination. Other people had felt it too. She went back to the apartment later that day, her body tense, expecting Elias to be waiting. But he wasn't. The place was still. Quiet. Too quiet. The closet was closed again. No sign of life. No notebook. No blankets. Just a bare space like it had been cleaned out. She called out softly. Elias. Nothing. She walked the entire apartment. He was gone. Or hiding. She wasn't sure which felt worse. She checked behind the furniture, under the beds, in every cabinet. Then she looked at the wall behind the closet. There was something off about it. She knocked on the wood. It sounded hollow. Like there was more space behind it. She examined the edges and found a thin seam in the wall. A panel, maybe. It didn't move easily, but after some effort and a little force, it cracked open. Behind it, a crawl space stretched deep into the wall, dark, tight, and full of dust. She turned on her flashlight and looked inside. It was cramped, maybe 3 feet wide, but long enough for someone to move through. Along the inside wall were claw marks. Actual marks, long, thin scrapes like fingernails had dragged across the wood. In the far corner was a pile of old clothes and a small lantern. And scrawled on the inner wall, barely visible in the light, were words written in shaky Spanish. "He promised I'd be safe." Marissa backed away fast. Her heart was pounding, her breath shallow. She didn't want to crawl in there. She didn't want to know what else might be inside. But now, she couldn't unsee it. This wasn't just a weird Airbnb. This was a place where something terrible had happened. Maybe still was happening. She went back to the police station again, this time with pictures. She showed them the crawl space, the writing, the claw marks. But the officer seemed less interested than before. "Señora," he said carefully, "this is an old building. Many apartments have crawl spaces like this. It is not illegal. Are you sure you're not just nervous?" She wanted to scream. There was a man living in the wall. "I spoke to him." The officer looked at her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "We can send someone to look." But his voice didn't sound urgent. It sounded like a formality, like someone humoring her. She left the station more frustrated than ever. Was Elias right? Were they all in on it? Was someone keeping the truth buried? She returned one more time, just before sunset. The apartment felt like it was holding its breath. The light from the windows was dim, casting long shadows across the tile floor. She stepped through the hallway, past the now empty closet, and whispered, "Elias." She thought she heard movement. A breath. Then silence. She sat on the floor, near the closet, and waited. And eventually, from the shadows, he came back. Not through the door, but from the crawl space itself. Quiet. Hesitant. He looked thinner, more afraid than before. "They cleaned it," he said softly. "They knew I spoke to you. That's why I left. But I couldn't go far. I have nowhere to go." Marissa stared at him. "Why won't they stop you?" He shook his head. "Because I'm not the problem. I'm the witness. And that's what scares them." Marissa sat frozen on the floor as Elias faded back into the darkness behind the closet, disappearing into the wall like a ghost. Her thoughts raced, trying to make sense of everything. Nothing about this trip was turning out the way she imagined. She came to escape her life, to find quiet, peace, maybe even healing. But instead, she'd found a man living in her wall, claw marks behind a false panel, and warnings scrawled in Spanish from people who might no longer be alive. And still, no one believed her. The police didn't care. The host didn't respond. Airbnb support kept giving her generic replies. "We're looking into it. Thank you for your patience. This matter is under review." It all felt rehearsed, robotic, like they were just buying time or avoiding something they already knew. Marissa couldn't take it anymore. She needed real answers. So she turned her focus to the host. The name listed on the Airbnb profile was Carlos R. The profile photo was generic, a landscape of a beach. No face. No real information. But she remembered his voice when she checked in, and the car he drove, a faded red Citroën. She started looking through online forums, rental complaint threads, and Spanish housing groups. After hours of digging, she came across a thread on a travel warning site, buried deep. It wasn't about the Airbnb, but about long-term rentals being used for something dark. People mentioned a man named Carlos Rivas, who used multiple fake identities to rent out units across southern Spain. One post claimed he used fake names to hide the fact that he had been under investigation years ago for human trafficking but had vanished before charges could be pressed. The post didn't have much proof, and most people brushed it off. But one comment chilled her to the bone. "Do not rent from Carlos R. He's not renting to travelers, he's hunting for them." Marissa slammed her laptop shut and sat in silence. The air felt tight in her lungs. If Elias was right, and this Carlos was really involved in something dangerous, then staying in that apartment was never safe. It wasn't haunted. It was hunted. She remembered the notebook Elias had. The phrases. "Don't trust the host. He watches everything. She felt sick. What if Elias wasn't the only one he'd let live in the walls? What if there were others who never made it out? Her skin crawled. She picked up her phone and dialed the emergency line again. This time, she demanded a different officer. She told them everything. Not just the noises, or the man in the wall, but the false name, the old reports, the hidden crawl space, and the fact that she believed something criminal had taken place in that apartment. They said they would send someone. Hours passed, and just when she thought they had forgotten, a knock came at the door. 2 plainclothes officers stood outside. They looked around the apartment with stiff expressions, snapping photos, shining flashlights into the crawl space. But they didn't take Elias. They didn't even seem surprised by the panel in the wall. One officer asked her to step outside while they spoke to him. Marissa waited nervously by the stairwell, listening to muffled voices through the door. After 20 minutes, they came out, thanked her, and left. Elias was gone. They didn't say where. She wasn't sure if they had taken him or if he had chosen to vanish again. Later that night, she received a message through Airbnb from Carlos R. It read, "Sorry about the inconvenience. Hope your stay is going well. Please let me know if you need anything." Her blood ran cold. He was watching. He knew. She packed up everything she had, shaking with each movement, and bolted for the nearest hotel. It didn't matter that she'd lose money. It didn't matter that it was almost midnight. She couldn't stay there another second. The next day, she filed a full report with the consulate, backed up all the photos, screenshots, and Elias's notes into a folder, and shared it with every journalist and safety blog she could find. Most never responded. One emailed her back asking for proof. She sent it all. Then silence. She never heard from them again. A few days later, she checked the Airbnb listing. It had been taken down. She refreshed the page. This listing is no longer available. Relief washed over her, but it didn't last. When she searched again using a different account, she found the same photos, same apartment, new listing name, new host. Anna L. A woman's name this time. Same captions. Same cozy description. Perfect for solo travelers. Quiet and safe. Her hands shook with rage. They were just starting over. Repackaging the nightmare for the next guest. And no one was stopping them. She returned to the neighborhood one last time before leaving Spain. She stood across the street from the building, watching as another young woman wheeled a small suitcase up to the door, smiling, unaware. Marissa wanted to run to her, to scream, to pull her away. But the words caught in her throat. The woman disappeared inside. The door closed. And the city moved on. Marissa couldn't forget what she had seen or what she had learned, no matter how many times she changed hotels or tried to push the experience out of her mind. Even in the comfort of a modern room with clean sheets and working locks, she slept with one eye open, her ears tuned to every creak and whisper. The memory of Elias's face, the silence of the walls, and that final message from Carlos haunted her like a nightmare that wouldn't end. Days passed. Then a week. But just when things seemed to settle, everything unraveled again. It started with a phone call. A voice she didn't recognize, flat and calm. "Miss Brooks. We're calling to confirm your return stay at the Seville Airbnb on Calle Santa Teresa. Your reservation has been rebooked for this weekend. Is that correct?" Her blood ran cold. She had never booked a return. She hung up and checked her account. A reservation had been made in her name, using her profile. She cancelled it immediately, changed her passwords, and contacted Airbnb support again. The same scripted responses came back. "Thank you for your message. We are investigating." She knew better. Someone had accessed her account. Someone wanted her back. She deleted the app and scrubbed her social media, but the dread never left. The same day, she received a letter at the front desk of the hotel she was staying in. No return address. No signature. Just a folded piece of paper with one sentence written in all caps. "You weren't supposed to open the door." Her hands trembled. She looked around the lobby, scanning every face. But no one stood out. No one looked suspicious. She took the note to the hotel manager, who called the police. Officers came, wrote a report, nodded politely, and said they'd look into it. But they didn't ask many questions. They didn't take the note. They didn't even look alarmed. Marissa realized something chilling in that moment. No one was going to help her. Not the local police. Not Airbnb. Not the host platform. Whoever was behind this was protected, or invisible. The next night, she woke up to the fire alarm blaring in the hotel. Guests were rushing into the hallways in confusion. The lights flickered. Marissa grabbed her bag and ran. As she joined the crowd outside, she turned and looked up at her floor. A figure was standing at the window of her room. Not moving. Just watching. She couldn't make out the face. But something in her gut screamed it was him. Carlos. Or someone connected to him. She called the police again, told them someone had been in her room, and begged for them to review the security footage. They said the alarm had been triggered by a malfunction. No break-ins were reported. It's safe to return. She didn't return. She checked out that night and bought the next plane ticket out of Spain. Back home, nothing felt the same. Her apartment felt unfamiliar. Her reflection looked older. She stopped talking to friends. How could she explain any of it without sounding insane? For a while, she avoided the internet completely. But eventually, curiosity pulled her back. She checked the Airbnb website again. Not for the listing, she knew better, but for her own review. She had left a detailed warning, with photos and descriptions. Now it was gone. Erased. Her profile still existed, but the review section was empty. It was as if she had never stayed there. As if it had never happened. She searched for news articles, forums, anything that might back up her story. Most of the posts she had saved before had been taken down or archived. The user who messaged her with the warning had deleted their account. The story was fading, piece by piece, like it had been scrubbed from existence. Marissa started writing it all down. Not for anyone else, just for herself. She made backups, hidden folders, printed copies stored in separate places. It felt like the only control she had left. Some nights, she thought about Elias. Was he still there? Did they silence him? Or was he still hiding, waiting for someone else to open that door? She often wondered why he trusted her. Why he showed himself. Maybe he thought she could expose the truth. Maybe she reminded him of someone who had vanished before. Or maybe he just wanted someone to know he existed. Months later, a new story popped up in a local paper from Seville. The headline was small. Tourist goes missing in historic district. No photo. No name. Just a vague report that someone had never checked out of their rental. No signs of forced entry. No answers. Just another ghost swallowed by the city. Marissa knew the truth. She knew how it happened. She printed the article and added it to her file. That night, she locked every window and door, turned off all the lights, and sat in silence, listening. Not for sounds in the wall. Not for footsteps. But for the voice that whispered to her in the dark, reminding her what she had found. Not a man in hiding. Not a haunted house. But a system built to erase people. A system that almost erased her too.